Have you ever stopped to think about how some of the biggest, most devastating wars in history might have kicked off? Well, what if I told you they weren't just about grand strategies, but about giant misunderstandings? Today, we're going to dive into this idea of misperception. It's that dangerous and honestly surprisingly common gap between what world leaders think is going on and what's actually happening.
So let's start with that big idea right there. Just chew on that for a second. What if the history books have it a little bit wrong? What if the most brutal conflicts we've ever seen weren't just about clashing ideologies or fighting over territory, but were actually lit like a fuse by this terrifying gap, a gap between what leaders thought was true and what the reality on the ground actually was?
So, how is that even possible, right? Well, it all kicks off with something called the perception gap. You can think of it as this invisible, tricky space between objective reality, the world as it actually is, and the version of reality that we see through our own personal filters. We're talking about our beliefs, our biases, our hopes, and our fears too.
At its very core, misperception is really simple. It's when your internal map of the world just doesn't match the actual territory. And what's driving this? It's a powerful psychological truth. We don't just see the world, we interpret it. And more often than not, we end up seeing what we expect to see, or maybe even what we secretly want to see, instead of what's really there.
Here's a good way to think about it. It's like we're all living in two worlds at the same time. On one hand, you've got the world of subjective perception. That's our personal blend of beliefs and gut feelings. And on the other hand, you've got objective reality, the cold, hard facts. The disaster happens when a leader gets completely trapped in their own subjective world and starts making these huge world-changing decisions that are totally disconnected from what's actually going on.
So how does this perception gap actually lead to total catastrophe on the world stage? Well, let's dig into the first, and you could argue the most common, mistake it causes, just completely and fundamentally misreading your opponent.
This is the classic political blunder, the big one. It's when a leader looks at their adversary and thinks, nah, they're just bluffing. Or, you know what? They'll back down if we just push a little harder. They completely miscalculate how determined their opponent is, either by tragically underestimating them or sometimes by overestimating them.
And the price for getting this wrong, it can be absolutely earth-shattering. Just look at the 1930s. British leaders looked at Hitler and they saw what they wanted to see. They saw a rational guy with some limited goals who could probably be satisfied. So they saw a clear path to peace by just giving him what he wanted. But the objective reality? Well, the reality was that Hitler's ambitions had no limits, and every time they gave in, it just fueled his aggression, leading directly to the horror of World War II.
And listen, this isn't a one-way street. This kind of miscalculation cuts both ways. Leaders can overestimate an opponent's resolve, which some people argue happened with Milosevic in Serbia. Or, on the flip side, an aggressor can tragically underestimate how the world is going to react. Think about Saddam Hussein invading Kuwait. He almost certainly did not see the massive, unified international backlash that was about to come down on him.
Okay, so that leads us to the second major error. And this one's a classic trap for powerful nations, misjudging the options that a weaker country has. It's a total failure to see the world from their perspective, and believe me, it can have explosive results.
When you're a superpower, the world looks like it's full of possibilities, right? So it's really easy to look at a smaller nation and think, why are they acting so crazy? They have plenty of other choices. But here's the thing. You're seeing the world from your comfortable chair. From their point of view, they might feel totally backed into a corner, with dangerously few options left.
Pearl Harbor is just a chilling, perfect case study of this. To the Americans, Japan's attack seemed like this sudden, totally irrational act of aggression. It came out of nowhere. But if you look at it from the Japanese perspective, the American sanctions weren't just keeping things as they were. No, they saw those sanctions as an existential threat that was slowly strangling their nation. So in their minds, war wasn't just one of many options, it felt like the only option they had left to avoid total collapse.
And that brings us directly to our third common error. And this one is maybe the most psychologically tricky of them all. It's called the mirror image problem.
So this is the trap of believing that other countries see us exactly as we see ourselves. You see, we tend to see our own intentions as good, our own actions as purely defensive, and our motivations as totally pure. We look in the mirror, we see the good guy, and we just assume everyone else sees that same good guy.
This quote from the Cold War just says it all, doesn't it? American policymakers were genuinely confused that the Soviets felt threatened by their huge, growing nuclear arsenal. From their point of view, these weapons were for deterrence, for keeping the peace. They just couldn't see that from Moscow's perspective, a massive pile of nuclear weapons pointed directly at you looks, well, incredibly threatening, no matter how benign you say your motivations are.
So, we've looked at the what and the how of misperception, but now we've got to ask the most important question. Why does this keep happening? Why do smart people keep falling for this? Well, the answers aren't really in politics. They're deep inside our own psychology, especially in how our brains handle stress and uncertainty.
Psychologists have basically pinpointed 3 mental traps that are super dangerous during international crises. You can think of them as glitches in our mental software, the kind that can make our perceptions just veer dangerously off course from reality. Let's break them down one by one.
First up, you've got cognitive overconfidence. It's that dangerous feeling of being absolutely certain. It's that little voice in a leader's head that's whispering, "Don't worry, I got this. I know exactly what they're going to do." It's the very same overconfidence that let British leaders think they had Hitler all figured out, right before he plunged the entire world into war.
Next up is cognitive dissonance. Oh man, this one is huge, and we all do it. It's that really uncomfortable feeling you get when a new fact totally challenges a belief you hold dear. And to make that uncomfortable feeling go away, our brains do something that's both clever and dangerous. Instead of changing our beliefs to fit the new facts, we twist the facts to fit our beliefs. It's how a country can see itself as a peaceful defender and just decide an adversary's fear is simple paranoia, instead of, a logical reaction to its own actions.
And finally, there's defensive avoidance. This is basically the brain's ultimate escape hatch. When a reality is so threatening, so terrifying, that we literally can't bear to face it, our minds can just refuse to see it. We subconsciously block out all the warning signs because the truth, like the fact that your rival feels desperate enough to launch a surprise attack, is just too painful to even think about.
And this is the most important takeaway from all of this. These aren't just some cool stories from the history books. These psychological traps, they're hardwired into every single one of us. They are just as real and just as dangerous today as they were back in 1938 or 1941.
Which leads us with a really critical question for our own time. I mean, think about it. We are flooded with more data, more analysis, more information than any leaders in history have ever had. But does all that information actually make us any wiser? Or does it just give us more ammo to confirm the biases we already have, making it easier than ever to build our own convenient little realities? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.